Mara Kincaid's ship, the Halcyon, drifted through the darkness of the Iapetus belt, the hum of its engines a constant reminder that she was alone. Most of the other scavengers had long since given up on the sector. Too far from any trade lanes. Too much debris. But Mara wasn't like the others. She didn't just scavenge for fuel and spare parts. She found potential. And in the silence of deep space, she found peace. Today, though, something was different. A faint signal buzzed across her comm panel. At first, she thought it was interference. There was always something bouncing around in this part of space. But the signal cut through the static with a precision that made her lean forward in her seat. It wasn't just a signal. It was a distress beacon. Mara's fingers flew across the controls, tracing the signal source. Her heart skipped when she saw the coordinates. A vessel. But not any vessel she recognized. This was something alien, its profile unlike anything she'd ever seen before. The beacon continued to pulse, a weak, irregular flash of light in the cold vastness of space. Whoever it was, they needed help, and Mara wasn't one to leave a signal unanswered. The Halcyon's thrusters fired with a low, steady hum as she altered course, pulling the ship toward the source. It didn't take long to find the craft. A sleek, silver object, with jagged edges and a hull that looked as though it had been torn apart by a violent force. She docked next to it with the practiced precision of a seasoned mechanic. The exterior was silent, as if it had been adrift for eons. Mara grabbed her toolkit and slipped into her EVA suit, the weight of the helmet cold against her back. The airlock door to the alien ship slid open, and Mara stepped inside. The gravity lighter than expected. The ship's interior was a strange blend of advanced technology and ancient ruin. The walls shimmered with an eerie glow, and the soft hum of the remaining life support systems hinted at something still alive aboard. It didn't take long for Mara to spot the damage. The control panel near the center of the ship was a twisted mess of wires, scorched panels, and exposed circuitry. Vaporized. It looked like a short-range weapon had hit it hard, perhaps a sudden surge or even an explosion. But whatever it was, the damage was catastrophic. Mara's eyes glinted with determination. This was her territory. She set to work immediately, pulling apart the malfunctioning panel. It was delicate, strange work. The ship's alien tech didn't react like anything Mara was used to, yet the patterns of wear and tear felt familiar. She twisted, soldered, and rerouted, using tools designed for human hands to mend an alien machine. She had barely begun to make a dent in the repairs when the ship shifted. The floor under her feet hummed, a low, reverberating thrum that sent a chill up her spine. The ship was alive. Before she could react, an eerie, deep voice echoed in her head, distant but unmistakable. "Restorer." Mara froze. It was a voice not in her comms, not through her helmet, in her mind. It wasn't human. And it certainly wasn't anyone she'd ever heard of. The ship around her trembled again, and suddenly the lights flickered. A hulking figure, bathed in the glow of ancient, crackling energy, emerged from the depths of the ship's core. A being, tall, armored, and unmistakably alien, staggered forward, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. You have awakened me." Mara stepped back, her breath catching. The last thing she expected today was to fix a living, breathing alien. Mara's heart raced as the alien figure stepped forward, towering over her. His armor shimmered like liquid gold, its contours both sleek and formidable. His face was obscured by a helmet, but his eyes, bright, glowing with an unnatural intensity, pierced through her, and something deep inside her stirred with an unsettling mix of awe and terror. You have awakened me." The voice was deep, resonating in her mind with a force that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Mara froze, her hands still gripped around the ship's control panel. She instinctively took a step back, her brain racing to process what was happening. She had only just started fixing this alien wreck of a ship, not even knowing what it was, and now here she was, face to face with something that clearly wasn't human. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she settled for something simpler. Who? What are you? The alien's gaze softened, though the intensity of his presence didn't fade. I am Valsar, a guardian of the Luxury, he intoned. I was tasked to protect the relic ship you've dared to repair. The words were heavy, their meaning unclear. Luxury. Relic ship. Mara's voice cracked as she spoke, her mind scrambling to process what she had just heard. The universe was vast, full of species and histories she barely understood. But this felt different, like she had just opened a door that led to something far bigger than she could grasp. The alien, or Valsar, moved slowly, carefully, as though every step was weighed with the knowledge of centuries. He extended a hand toward her, and for a brief moment, she felt a strange, magnetic pull. His eyes glinted, filled with something close to sorrow, before he spoke again. Your repair has brought me back from the brink, he said, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The Luxury do not permit such actions by mere mortals. Wait, Mara said, her brain catching up. You mean I fixed you? Valsar nodded solemnly, the glow of his eyes dimming slightly. Indeed, the damage to this vessel was beyond even our own kind's ability to repair. Yet you have done what no other has, restored the impossible. A surge of pride mixed with confusion rose in Mara's chest. She wasn't a genius. She was just a mechanic, trained to see through the layers of a machine and find its core. But somehow, this alien, this being, was acknowledging her as something more than just an ordinary human. A sense of dread followed, as though fixing this ship had unknowingly placed her at the center of something far larger than herself. How did you survive? Mara asked, struggling to piece together the fragments of this strange encounter. I was placed in stasis, Valsar replied, his voice growing distant. Our race, the Luxury, created such ships to preserve the knowledge of ages. When the Jarek attacked, we were forced to abandon many of our relics. I was left adrift, frozen in time, my body and mind left vulnerable. Mara's thoughts raced. Jarek. That name was vaguely familiar. She'd read about mercenary factions, ruthless in their conquest, but she'd never thought they were real. Now it seemed they were part of this alien history, a history she had unknowingly revived. Wait, Mara said, squinting at him. Why me? Why am I the one who restored you? I'm just a mechanic. You are more than you know, Valsar said, his voice now tinged with something she couldn't place, an emotion she couldn't quite identify. You have done what even the greatest of your kind could not. The Luxury ships were designed to be preserved, beyond the reach of time and decay. Yet you, he hesitated, his gaze softening. You have awakened me. And for that, you are the Restorer. The title hit Mara like a cold wave. The Restorer. She didn't know what it meant, but the gravity of Valsar's words settled deep within her. She was no longer just a simple mechanic. She had triggered something beyond anything she'd ever imagined. And now, this alien guardian was bound to her. Mara opened her mouth to ask more questions, but the ship's hull trembled violently. A shrill warning alarm blared in her ear. Something was wrong. Something was coming. Valsar's eyes snapped to her, the soft glow now burning like a fierce beacon. They are here. The Jarek. They know you have repaired the ship. Mara's stomach dropped. Her hands went instinctively to the tools on her belt, though she knew they were no match for whatever was out there. You have to protect me, Mara said, her voice tight with fear. Valsar's gaze never wavered. I will not let them take you. I have sworn to protect you, Restorer. The words settled over her like a weight, and though she wasn't sure whether to feel reassured or terrified, one thing was clear. Mara's life had just changed forever. And in the cold depths of space, enemies that she didn't even understand were closing in on her. The alien ship hummed beneath Mara's feet, vibrating with energy as the warning alarms blared louder. She glanced at Valsar, who was already moving toward the control panel. His armor glowed faintly, its surface reflecting the dim emergency lights. The calm efficiency in his movements contrasted sharply with the panic that surged in Mara's chest. "What do we do?" Mara asked, her voice sharp, heart racing. She had dealt with hostile encounters before, bandits, rival salvagers. But this was on an entirely different level. Velsar didn't answer immediately. His glowing eyes scanned the ship's data readouts with practiced speed, the systems seemingly responding to him like a sentient being. Finally, he turned toward her. "The Zarek," he said, his voice cold, "are an ancient enemy of my people. They are merciless, relentless in their pursuit of anything they deem useful." He stepped closer, his presence towering and unyielding. "This ship is not just a vessel. It is a relic, a piece of luxury history, containing technologies and knowledge that could change the course of the galaxy." Mara's stomach twisted. "So that's why they're after it." "Correct," Velsar replied, his gaze unwavering. "And now, they know you are the one who has awakened it. The Zarek will not stop until they have it in their hands, or until you are dead." The gravity of the situation settled on Mara like a stone. She had only wanted to fix a broken ship, make some salvage, maybe repair her own vessel in the process. Now she was thrust into the middle of an ancient war she didn't understand, with an alien guardian tied to her side, and an enemy fleet bearing down on them. "We need to leave," Mara said, taking a step back toward the airlock. "Now." Velsar nodded. "The Zarek are not far. We will have to move quickly, but the ship is damaged. It will not withstand the fight for long." Mara clenched her fists. She wasn't ready for this. A mechanic didn't fight galactic wars. But it didn't matter anymore. She had repaired the ship. And now she had a responsibility. A weight she had never imagined. "We have to find a way to buy some time," Mara said, her mind racing. "Can you fight?" Velsar turned to her, his eyes flickering with a faint, almost predatory light. "I am a guardian. I was designed to fight." "Good," Mara muttered, "because I have an idea." She hurried to the ship's control systems, fingers flying over the interface as she worked quickly to assess their capabilities. As a salvage operator, she wasn't unfamiliar with alien technology, but this was something far beyond her usual fare. The luxury ship was an enigma, beyond advanced, almost too advanced. Mara's eyes scanned the readouts, quickly spotting a section of the ship's weapons array, disrupted, but potentially functional. If she could reactivate even a fraction of it, they might stand a chance against the incoming Zarek forces. "We don't have much time," Mara said, "but I think I can get us a few shots at them." Velsar moved beside her, his presence like an impenetrable wall. "Do what you must, but be quick." Mara worked faster now, her hand shaking slightly from the adrenaline rush. Her mind raced through the possibilities, piecing together parts of the alien tech as though it were a puzzle. She rerouted power, reconnected circuits, bypassed damaged systems, her heart pounding as she prayed the systems would hold. Behind her, Velsar stood still, watching her, his quiet presence a reminder of the stakes. The Zarek were coming, and they were coming fast. Suddenly, the ship shuddered again, this time more violently. The external sensors flickered, displaying the images of Zarek warships emerging from the shadow of a nearby moon. Their sleek, angular shapes were menacing, and the faint hum of their engines reverberated in the space around them. "They're here," Velsar said, his voice colder now, like the calm before a storm. "Prepare yourself, Mara." Mara's fingers flew over the final controls. "Done. We got one shot at this." She straightened, wiping sweat from her brow. "Do your thing, Velsar." The luxury guardian stepped to the nearest bulkhead, his armor shifting with a fluidity that was almost graceful despite its imposing nature. He moved with purpose, positioning himself near the ship's central control hub. His glowing eyes flickered with a readiness that made the hairs on the back of Mara's neck stand up. "We are not just survivors," Velsar said, his voice low and resolute. We are the last hope of the Luxury. Mara swallowed hard, gripping the ship's helm. Then let's make it count. As the Xeric ships closed in, Mara took a deep breath and initiated the weapon systems. The ship's core hummed to life, and the energy surged into the weapons array. A bolt of energy shot out, streaking across the void to strike the lead Xeric ship, sending it into a spiral. But Mara knew this was just the beginning. The Xeric would retaliate, hard. They were here to destroy everything, and she and Valsar had just fired the first shot. Mara's pulse pounded in her ears as the first shot from their makeshift weapon tore through the Xeric ship's hull, sending it careening off course in a blaze of sparks and debris. But it wasn't enough. The other Xeric ships quickly adjusted their trajectories, their sleek forms closing in around them like a trap tightening. "Get ready," Mara muttered to herself, her hands shaking as she adjusted the ship's thrusters. She'd never been a fighter, never imagined herself in this kind of situation, but the moment she'd repaired the Luxury ship, that had all changed. She was in the crosshairs now, with enemies closing in, and there was no turning back. Valsar was already at his post, moving with the precision of a soldier who had lived through centuries of combat. His towering figure was a sharp contrast to the ship's dim interior, his golden armor glowing with the faintest hint of anticipation. As the next wave of Xeric ships closed in, his voice echoed through the ship's comms. "They will not stop," he said. "You must keep them distracted, Mara." Mara's hands hovered over the console, her mind racing through options. Distracted. She wasn't a fighter. She was a mechanic. But the urgency of Valsar's command was clear. She had to do something. They couldn't outrun the Xeric. The ship was too damaged, and the Luxury vessel was designed for speed, not extended combat. Her fingers danced over the controls, rerouting power, trying to gain control of the weapons array. The ship shuddered again, a blast from one of the Xeric warships skimming by the side. The hull groaned, and the lights flickered, but Mara didn't let up. She needed to find a way to outsmart them. Then a thought struck her, a risky one, but it just might work. "Valsar, can you use the ship's graviton fields to mess with their trajectory?" Mara asked, her mind calculating the physics as she spoke. He didn't answer immediately. She felt a brief silence in the comms, and then his voice came through, more composed than before. "Yes, but it will be a limited effect. I can only disrupt their course for a short time." "Good enough," Mara said, and she quickly modified the ship's gravimetric systems. With a sharp exhale, she pulled the lever to engage the graviton field. The ship shuddered once more, but this time, there was a deeper rumble that echoed through the hull, and a shockwave rippled outward. On the external sensors, Mara saw the Xeric ships veer suddenly off course, their sleek forms twisting and colliding with each other in a chaotic mess of sparks and screeching metal. She grinned, adrenaline surging through her. It worked. But they weren't out of the woods yet. The Xeric ships quickly recovered, and Mara could see that the remaining warships had adjusted their trajectories. The graviton field wouldn't last forever. It had bought them time, but only a few precious minutes. "Keep them off us, Valsar," Mara shouted as she began to power up the engines, preparing for a hasty exit. Valsar didn't need further instruction. His movements were a blur as he activated the ship's secondary defense systems. The walls of the ship rippled with energy, and Mara felt the hum of the ship intensify. She glanced at the external monitors. Valsar was unleashing a barrage of concentrated plasma blasts from the ship's remaining weapons, hitting Xeric ships with terrifying precision. Mara's heart raced. This was no longer a simple salvage mission. It was a battle for survival. Suddenly, the ship jerked violently, throwing Mara off balance. She slammed into the console, catching herself just in time. The Xeric had fired back, powerful energy blasts that rattled the entire vessel. The hull groaned as another hit landed, and this time, Mara could see the damage on the monitors. The external shields were failing. Shields at 30%. The ship's system chimed, voice flat and unfeeling. Damn it. Mara cursed under her breath, rapidly rerouting power to the shield generator. The Xeric weren't playing around anymore. They were adapting faster than she could adjust. Every second that passed brought them closer to total destruction. "We need to make it to the nearby station," Mara said, her voice tight. She wasn't sure if it was even still functional, but it was their best shot at getting out of this alive. "Can you keep them off us long enough for us to escape?" Valsar didn't hesitate. His eyes glowed brighter, and his armor pulsed with an energy that filled the room. "I will do what I must." The ship lurched again as Mara pushed the throttle forward. The Xeric were still firing, but she was beginning to see an opening, just enough to make a break for it. As she steered toward the station, she glanced over at Valsar. The Luxury Guardian was standing tall, his face unreadable behind his golden helmet, but there was something in his stance, something that spoke of centuries of battle and unwavering resolve. And then, in a sudden, decisive motion, he raised his arm, directing the ship's weapons to fire once more. A devastating bolt of energy shot out from the ship's cannon, hitting the Xeric ship closest to them with pinpoint precision. The explosion sent shockwaves through the vacuum of space. But Mara didn't slow down. The station was in sight. They could make it. "Hold on," Mara shouted as she punched in the coordinates. The Xeric would follow, but the station was their only hope. As the ship surged forward, the faint outline of the station loomed ahead, a beacon of possible salvation in the cold void of space. The station loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette against the vast expanse of space. Salvage Bay 19 was its name, a derelict refueling and repair station long forgotten by most of the galaxy. Its external lights flickered weakly, and its massive bulk was pocked with the scars of countless years of disuse. Yet, in that moment, it was a lifeline, a sliver of hope. Mara's fingers gripped the ship's controls as she pushed the Halcyon forward, her eyes fixed on the station's entry port. The Xeric were close, too close. Behind them, she could see the flashes of weapons fire streaking across the dark sky, a relentless barrage of deadly energy trying to tear them apart. The Xeric ships were faster than they had any right to be, adapting to their every move, each shot calculated with ruthless precision. Shields at 10%. The ship's system chimed, its voice growing more frantic with every hit. "We're not gonna make it," Mara muttered, her heart thudding in her chest. But she didn't give up. She couldn't. Not with everything on the line. "Valsar, what's our status?" she shouted, over the roar of incoming fire. The Luxury Guardian stood tall beside her, his glowing eyes scanning the external sensors. The intensity in his gaze never wavered. He had fought in wars, faced enemies far deadlier than the Xeric, but even he seemed to understand the stakes. The Xeric were relentless. "They will not allow us to escape easily," Valsar said, his voice steady. "But they will not stop me." A sudden explosion rocked the ship, sending Mara sprawling against the console. The ship bucked, and a surge of panic flooded her chest. "No, not now. Shields at 5%. Mara's mind raced. They had to make it to the station, and fast. But the Xeric weren't giving them an inch. They had to either outrun them or fight their way through. "Valsar, do you have anything left?" Mara asked through gritted teeth, fighting to keep the ship on course. The Guardian's eyes glowed brighter, an ominous, almost terrifying light. "I can disrupt their weapons for a time. But you must lead us into the station's dock." Mara's stomach tightened. She knew what that meant. Valsar could block their shots for a few moments, but once they were inside the station, they would be trapped in its narrow docking bay. The Xeric would have every opportunity to overwhelm them. There was no turning back. "Get ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She activated the maneuvering thrusters, dodging another incoming shot as the station's entry port grew closer. The ship's engines screamed, pushing them faster. Mara's pulse quickened as the station's jagged edges filled the view screen. It was so close. Just a little further, and they'd be inside, safe for a moment. But the Xeric weren't far behind. One of their ships cut across the Halcyon's path, its weapons primed. This was it. Valsar, Mara shouted. With a flick of his wrist, the Luxury Guardian raised his hand toward the incoming Xeric ship. A pulse of golden energy radiated from his armor, streaking out to collide with the enemy ship's weapons. The Xeric ship shuddered as its weapons powered down, temporarily incapacitated. The ship veered, unable to fire, but it didn't stop. The others were closing in, and fast. "Now, Mara," Valsar urged, his voice commanding. Mara slammed the control stick forward, guiding the ship into the docking bay. A shudder ran through the Halcyon as the ship's hull scraped the edges of the station's protective shields. There was a sickening screech of metal as they barely made it through. But Mara didn't care. They were inside. Docking complete. The ship's system confirmed. Mara exhaled a shaky breath, her hands trembling on the controls. But they weren't safe. Not yet. The bay doors slammed shut behind them, and she could hear the faint whine of the Xeric ships hovering outside, waiting for their prey. "We're inside," Mara said, her voice strained. "Now what?" Valsar's gaze turned toward the station's dark, crumbling interior. The walls of the bay were barely holding together, and the flickering lights cast long shadows across the station's decaying frame. "Now we hide," Valsar said grimly. "And wait. The Xeric will not stop until they have us." Mara's heart sank. They were trapped, with nowhere to run. No backup. No escape. She glanced at the comms, but there was nothing. Not even a distress signal. No one would come for them. "I didn't sign up for this," Mara muttered, slumping in her seat. "I just wanted to fix a ship. Now we're sitting ducks." Valsar looked at her with something close to pity in his glowing eyes. "The universe is never as simple as we wish it to be, but you have made your choice, Restorer, and now we must face the consequences." As Mara looked around the darkened station, she realized just how much she had unwittingly unleashed. The Luxury ship, the Xeric pursuit, and Valsar's ancient guardianship. They were all part of something much larger than her, and whether she liked it or not, she was in the thick of it now. The question was, how long could they stay hidden? The dark silence of the station's docking bay enveloped them like a heavy fog. Mara sat in the pilot's seat, her eyes fixed on the sealed bay doors, her mind racing. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. Outside, the Xeric warships hovered in the void, waiting, watching. The thin hum of the Halcyon systems was the only sound in the air. "How long do you think we have?" Mara asked, breaking the oppressive silence. Valsar stood motionless beside her, his posture unwavering, his golden armor reflecting the dim, flickering lights above. He hadn't said much since they entered the station, but Mara could feel the tension radiating from him. His mission was far from over. He had sworn to protect her, to protect the relic, but she could sense that something else lingered behind his eyes, a deeper, ancient conflict. "The Xeric are methodical," Valsar replied, his voice low and cold. "They will know we are inside. They will not attack the station yet, but once they are certain we are trapped, they will move in. It is only a matter of time." Mara clenched her fists. She wasn't ready to give up. She'd faced countless odds before, scraping by in the underbelly of the galaxy. But this felt different. The Luxury ship, Valsar, the Xeric. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was something bigger. The software of the Halcyon systems pinged in her ears as she monitored the docking bay's surroundings. She pulled up a station schematic, her brow furrowing. There was a way out. "There's an old maintenance tunnel behind the bay," Mara muttered, tracing her finger along the schematic. "If we can get through there, we can make our way deeper into the station. It's a long shot, but it might give us the element of surprise." Valsar's eyes locked onto hers. "You would leave the ship?" Mara glanced at the Luxury ship's damaged systems, her stomach turning at the thought of abandoning it. But the Xeric were relentless, and the Halcyon was already in no shape to fend them off for long. Their only real chance was to move, to get deeper into the station, find something useful, anything that could turn the tide. "We don't have a choice," Mara said. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to find us. We need to find a way to fight back." Valsar didn't respond at first, but she could sense his hesitation. He knew the stakes as well as she did. The Xeric were not to be underestimated. With a sharp motion, he unclipped a sleek alien weapon from his side, something that looked like a cross between a rifle and a spear. His fingers ran over the weapon, ensuring it was primed. "Very well. We move. But know this, Mara. The Xeric will not stop. They will search for us until they find us." Mara stood, taking one last glance at the ship. She didn't want to leave it, but there was no time to waste. "Then let's make sure they don't find us too easily." She led the way, navigating through the cramped corridors of the docking bay. The station was even more decrepit on the inside, its walls crumbling, the air stale with the scent of decay. Once a hub for intergalactic trade and fuel, now it was little more than a forgotten relic in the vast emptiness of space. As they moved deeper into the station, Mara's heart pounded with every step. The path ahead was dark and treacherous, the old maintenance tunnel barely lit by flickering lights overhead. The sound of their footsteps echoed ominously through the hallways. "Do you hear that?" Mara whispered, stopping abruptly. Valsar turned his head sharply. The soft hum of distant engines reached their ears. "They are already searching," he said, his voice tight. Mara's pulse quickened. She could feel the danger drawing closer. They needed to keep moving. They continued down the narrow corridor, passing rusted doors and abandoned consoles. But the deeper they went, the more unsettling the station became. The walls felt like they were closing in, and an eerie silence settled around them. At last, they reached the maintenance tunnel's entrance, a rusted hatch that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Mara forced it open with a grunt, revealing a dark passage beyond. "After you," Valsar said, stepping aside. Mara hesitated for a moment before she stepped into the darkness, her flashlight illuminating the narrow tunnel ahead. She heard Valsar follow closely behind, his footsteps silent but heavy. "Stay close," she murmured, already regretting the decision to leave the ship. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it felt, but there was no turning back. The Xeric were closing in, and this was their only shot. Behind them, the station creaked, the ominous presence of the Xeric ships outside still lingering, waiting for the moment when they would strike. But Mara didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. They had to keep moving, keep fighting, and she would not let the Xeric win. The tunnel was narrow, and the air grew heavier with every step. Mara's flashlight flickered intermittently, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Every creak of the station's decaying walls sent a shiver down her spine. The deeper they went, the more the station felt like a tomb, an abandoned relic, a forgotten place where something had been left behind. Mara had no idea what they might find, but something told her they weren't the only ones in the station. The Xeric had made their way in, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse was hidden in the station's depths. "Keep moving," Valsar said, his voice a steady anchor in the overwhelming silence. He was always calm, always controlled. His armor gleamed faintly in the flashlight's beam, a stark contrast to the dark surroundings. He hadn't said much since they entered the tunnel, but Mara could tell he was assessing their every move, every sound. Her pulse was quickening as they moved further. It was the uncertainty that got to her. Every turn of the tunnel felt like it could lead them straight into a trap. Her hand instinctively gripped the blaster at her side. The path ahead twisted, and soon the narrow corridor opened up into a larger chamber. The air here was cooler, and the floor was covered in a layer of dust and debris. A low hum resonated through the walls, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew stronger, vibrating in her chest. Mara exchanged a glance with Valsar. He nodded slightly, motioning for her to proceed cautiously. They moved forward slowly, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the dim space. As they ventured further into the chamber, Mara's eyes landed on something unusual, a large, circular structure in the center of the room. Its surface was smooth, almost organic, like a giant alien seed that had taken root in the heart of the station. "What is this?" Mara muttered, stepping closer. Her fingers brushed against the smooth surface, and a sudden jolt of energy ran up her arm. She jerked back, startled. Veilsar was already moving, examining the structure with a careful eye. "This is not of the Luxury," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "This is something older, and far more dangerous." Mara's stomach tightened. "What is it?" Valsar's gaze was unwavering, a shadow of something grim crossing his features. "This is a relic of the Xeric. A weapon, perhaps, one that has been dormant for centuries." A deep, almost imperceptible growl rumbled from within the structure, and the walls of the chamber seemed to shudder in response. The hum from earlier intensified, and then silence. Absolute silence. The stillness was shattered by the unmistakable sound of something large moving, something alive, and it was coming toward them. Mara froze, her breath caught in her throat. Valsar's hand instinctively went to his weapon, his eyes scanning the room. Then, a low guttural screech echoed from the depths of the chamber. From the shadows emerged creatures, their bodies a grotesque blend of insect and machine, something born of the Xeric's twisted ingenuity. Their eyes glowed a deep red, and their jagged limbs scraped across the metal floor. "We need to move, now," Mara whispered, her voice barely audible as panic began to rise in her chest. Veilsar didn't hesitate. His weapon was already in his hand, and with a swift motion, he unleashed a barrage of energy blasts that tore through the nearest creature. The alien's body disintegrated in a flash of golden light, but there were more, too many more. "Go," Veilsar commanded, his voice like a whip. "Head for the exit." Mara didn't need to be told twice. She spun on her heel, sprinting toward the far side of the chamber. Her heart raced, adrenaline flooding her veins. She could hear Veilsar behind her, his movements fluid and precise as he cleared a path through the oncoming creatures. The tunnel's entrance was in sight, but the creatures were closing in, their shrill screeches filling the air. The sound of their scuttling feet echoed louder as they gained ground. Mara's pulse quickened, and she pushed her legs to go faster, the light from her flashlight bouncing erratically as she ran. Veilsar was beside her now, his weapon flashing as he fired at the pursuing monsters. One by one, they fell, but there were too many. "We need to block them," Mara shouted, her voice desperate. "There is no time." Veilsar barked back. "We are too exposed. Keep moving." They were almost to the tunnel's entrance when Mara heard the unmistakable hiss of the Xeric outside. Their ships, no longer waiting, now descending on the station. The exit was mere meters away, but the creatures were closing in fast. Panic surged through Mara's veins. If they didn't escape now, they would be overwhelmed by both the Xeric and these monstrosities lurking within the station. Mara could see the light at the end of the tunnel. She made a desperate sprint, but just as she reached the threshold, a creature lunged at her from the shadows. Its claws slashed through the air with terrifying speed. Without thinking, she fired her blaster, hitting the creature square in the chest. It recoiled and fell back, but more were closing in. "Move," Veilsar shouted, pulling her forward with a strength she hadn't known he possessed. Together, they dove into the tunnel, the entrance sealing behind them with a resounding clang. They were safe, for now. Mara's breath came in ragged gasps as she and Veilsar sprinted through the maintenance tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. The distant screeches of the creatures they had narrowly escaped still reverberated in her ears, but it was the sound of the Xeric ships descending that truly had her heart pounding. Valsar's gaze was locked ahead, his glowing eyes scanning the tunnel for any signs of danger. His hand was firmly gripped around his weapon, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Mara didn't even have to ask him to protect her. He was already doing so, without hesitation. The walls of the tunnel were slick with dust and grime, and the faint hum of the station's failing power systems sent an eerie vibration through the metal. They had no time to waste. If they didn't find a way out soon, the Xeric would breach the station, and the creatures within would make certain there was no escape. "Where does this tunnel lead?" Mara asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice as she glanced over her shoulder. Valsar didn't answer right away, his mind focused. "The central core of the station. It is the heart of the station's systems, and the last place they would expect us to go." "Great, so we're heading straight into the lion's den," Mara muttered, trying to make light of the situation. But the truth was, they had no choice. They had to get to the core, where perhaps, just perhaps, there was something they could use to fight back. Or better yet, shut down the station entirely. They reached a junction in the tunnel where three paths split. Valsar stopped, his expression unreadable beneath his helmet. "This way," he said, taking the right path, leading them deeper into the bowels of the station. The sound of the Xeric ships outside grew louder, closer. The Xeric were circling, and soon they would force their way in. Mara could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. They were getting closer to something important, but the deeper they ventured, the more she feared what they might find. At the end of the tunnel, a large access door loomed, more ancient and battered than the others. The markings on it were alien, far beyond anything she had seen before, even on the Luxari ship. But there was no time to study it. Valsar pushed the door open with a grunt, revealing a dimly lit chamber beyond. The space was enormous, spanning the width of several station blocks, and filled with strange, humbling machinery. "This is it," Valsar said, his voice reverberating through the chamber. "The core." Mara stepped into the room, feeling the immense power that pulsed through the walls. The center of the chamber held a massive cylindrical structure, glowing faintly with a bluish light. Tendrils of energy coursed through the air, connecting to various consoles, tubes, and conduits. The whole place felt alive. An energy source unlike anything Mara had ever seen. "What is this?" she asked, awed. "This station was built around a power source," Valsar explained. "It was once the heart of a weapon of unimaginable power. The Xeric used it to wage war across systems, but when the station was abandoned, they left it dormant." Mara swallowed hard. She was starting to understand. The Xeric weren't just after her and Valsar. They were after the station's power, their last piece of this ancient weapon. And if the Xeric got their hands on it, they could wield it to dominate the galaxy. But they didn't have much time. The Xeric ships were almost through. "Mara," Valsar said sharply, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "We must act quickly. If we can disable the core, it will prevent the Xeric from harnessing its power." Her mind raced. She wasn't a weapons expert. She was just a mechanic. But she could repair things, rewire them, make them work in ways they weren't supposed to. This was no different, just on a much larger, more dangerous scale. Mara rushed toward one of the consoles, pulling up the schematics of the core's systems. She ran her fingers over the display, trying to make sense of the ancient technology. "There's a power conduit here," Mara muttered, pointing to a section of the schematics. "I can overload the system, cause a meltdown, but it'll take down everything, including us, if we're not quick enough." "Do it," Valsar said firmly, stepping back to cover their exit. "I will ensure you have time." Her heart skipped a beat. There was no turning back. She had only one shot at this. Mara's hands flew over the console, rerouting power and connecting the wires in ways that made her feel like a child playing with dangerous toys. Her mind was clear, focused solely on the task at hand. The Xeric were coming. The creatures were still lurking. But in this moment, all she had was the pulse of the core beneath her fingers. The countdown began. 5 minutes. "Velsar," she called, her voice sharp. "Get ready. We don't have long." Velsar stepped forward, his weapon raised. "I will hold them off. You finish the task." Mara nodded, the weight of the decision settling deep in her chest. This was it.